Hey everyone, if you've been around here for a while, you may remember that one of the first books I ever reviewed on my channel was Created to be a Helpmeet by Debi Pearl, which is a book by one half of the couple who also wrote To Train Up a Child, which is the book that advocates for beating your children. It tells you what kind of sticks or pipes to beat your children with. If your newborn baby bites while breastfeeding, pull its hair, and all kinds of other child abuse. It's a book which has been linked to the deaths of at least 7 adoptive children. It's heartbreaking. And this is a fundamentalist Christian family who have written a whole series of books and newsletters and magazines and all kinds of content over the years. They have YouTube channels as well. There was a weird phase where Michael Pearl went through a stage where he was talking about how the Bible proves aliens exist and all kinds of bizarre stuff like that. And Created to be a Helpmeet was Debi's first solo book, to the best of my knowledge, and it's one in which she talks about, how to be a good wife and how to serve your husband in the best possible way and so on. Turns out Michael has also allowed her, and yes, I really mean that, to write another book titled Prepared to be a Helpmeet. This is a book for all the single women out there like myself, and it teaches you how to prepare to get married and do everything for a man. So it's for us single ladies, On the blurb of the book, it says, being a good helpmeet starts long before marriage. It is a mindset, a learned habit, a way of life established as a young unmarried girl. And today we're going to be looking at this book to try and learn together how to form this habit of subservience and denial. Before we start, let's get the important things out of the way and talk about how incredible is this outfit. You can't fully see it on camera, but let me show you this. It's a two-piece, and it matches, and it has flared trousers. Tell me it's not the coolest thing you've ever seen. I'm very, very excited with this outfit. We have a little one here to say hi. Say hello. Hello. Say hello. My name is the Kubi, and I am the cutie. That's you. Kubi the cutie. Oh, pardon you, baby. Oh, you're in the seat. Good girl. Today we're only going to be looking at the first chapter of this book, which recounts Debi's own story of meeting her husband Michael, and she kind of holds it up as this pinnacle for all good relationships and wonderful marriages, and she's like, this is the way it should be. You can have this too. It's meant to be super inspirational and stuff, but as we'll see as we get into the video, it is just full of crazy red flags and worrying behaviour. If you haven't seen my other videos on the Pearls, then you might not realise, but they have an incredibly dysfunctional marriage, which I would say is bordering on abusive. I can't say for certain because I don't know, I've not been there to witness it or see it or whatever, and I'm not them, but from the way Debi writes about their relationship, from the way Michael writes about their relationship, I would say it's incredibly toxic and damaging. Michael seems incredibly controlling and demanding, and there have been instances of physical violence between them, which has resulted in Debi throwing rocks at Michael and all kinds of stuff like this, and it's just very, very bizarre. So bear in mind as we go on and read the stuff in this book that she's holding up as this fairy tale story. It is not a healthy marriage. This is not something to aspire to, and yet they tell people to aspire to it. It's very bizarre. The other thing to remember, and that I was reminded while reading the introduction to this book, is that even though this book is written by Debi, a woman, it's very important that we remember that women should not be allowed even the slightest bit of power or independence, and we need to acknowledge this. That's why, although technically Debi wrote this book, she then had several men look over it and add in their own notes to the text, or as Debi describes it, men were asked to add their comments on the contents of this book, so throughout its pages you'll see small call-outs like the one below containing statements from the men concerning the related underlined text. Because damn women, how dare they have opinions or knowledge on anything. We cannot trust women these days to do anything, especially not write a book based on their own life experiences for other women. Just everything is better with a little bit of mansplaining. You can only learn how to be a woman from men. It's one of the facts of life. So let's take a look at chapter 1, which is the story, like I say, of how Debi and Michael met. And usually I wouldn't put this much emphasis on people's personal stories and their personal lives, and I wouldn't want to comment on their personal relationship in much detail. It's when we reviewed the Girl Defined book and stuff, I tried to stay away from their personal stories too much and kind of mostly commented on the lessons they were trying to impart on other people. It's normally how I try and do things, but in this book, Debbie uses her story as an example of a healthy, positive relationship, and she literally describes their meeting as a fairy tale. She describes their relationship that way, and she portrays it as something to aspire to, when in reality, as I've said, there are just, it's full of red flags and abusive traits, and it just seems incredibly dangerous to pretend that this is normal and healthy. And that's why I'm dedicating this whole video to this first chapter, because I do think it needs talking about. I do think it needs kind of debunking, if you can put it that way. I do want to comment on specific examples so that other people don't turn a blind eye to these blatant warning signs and end up falling into this kind of unhealthy and potentially abusive relationship too. I think it is worth commenting on. So Debbie has briefly written about their meeting before, and in other videos I commented on how it seemed creepy and predatory, but Debbie goes into far more detail in this book than she has in anything else that I've ever read by her. And honestly, the more details we get, the more it seems creepy and predatory. Here's an abridged version of the opening to this chapter. I had just turned 13 when I saw him and knew, just simply knew, he was my man. It was preposterous to think that I, a scrawny little kid who had not even gone through puberty, would claim him. The whole community had been talking about the famous young preacher who had been invited to speak at First Baptist Church's teen retreat. He was all man, plain and simple. At least 6'4" and a dark jaw shadow where he shaved away his beard. My young mind quickly assessed him. He seemed bigger than life, a super-in-charge type of man. He was old, very old, and way too big, outweighing me by over 100 pounds. I guessed he must have been at least 21 years old. Now, as a young teen, I get it. Your hormones are all over the place, and you absolutely get crushes on older guys and adults. Honestly, that's quite normal for a lot of teenage girls, but it is the responsibility of those adults to never, ever, ever take advantage of those crushes, especially when you're an adult in a position of power looking after kids. You don't lead those kids on, you don't groom them, and you definitely shouldn't end up marrying them. You have a man here who is at least 21, maybe older, who is in charge of a church's teen retreat. So he's looking after these children, he's in charge of these children, he's in a position of power over these children, and this 13-year-old child, pre-puberty, has a crush on him. The fact that he didn't immediately shut this down and that's the end of the story is your first massive red flag and warning sign. There's something wrong in that. This is not the romantic story that Debbie seems to think it is. If anything, it just screams of grooming, and it does kind of explain why Debbie puts up with so much abusive crap from Michael to this day, as we've seen in her previous books and articles and so on. She goes on to say, then the preacher and his little brother stood to play musical instruments and sing. Finally, Michael, the big brother, began to preach. Sometime while he was preaching the gospel, God spoke to me. He's the one you will marry. Whoa, I thought. I don't even need to wear a bra yet, and God is letting me know who I will marry. I clearly remember thinking, this is just too weird. He is too old, and I'm just a little kid. But God's ways are not our ways. I'm sure glad about that. So, this teenager with a crush goes home and she tells her parents, and her mother just completely enables this. At home that evening, I told my mum about how the stupid older teens had acted at the meeting due to the storm. Then I casually told her that God had spoken to me and told me that when I grew up, the preacher guy would be my husband. I handed her the flyer from the teen retreat. Here's the preacher man's name. My mum acted like it was an everyday fare. I think she really believed me. She was a new Christian, and I guess these things were as new to her as they were to me. She just said, well, you need to start praying for him. Being a preacher means he will need a lot of prayer. Yes, small child with raging hormones, please pursue this adult man to your will. This is the most irresponsible parenting. I know my niece is currently 2, 3, but if one day she came home to me at 13 years old and told me she was going to marry a man who was currently 8 or 9 years older than her, I would be like, nah, you're not, mate. You don't encourage it. You tell her, yeah, those feelings are normal, crushes are normal. And then you explain to her why it's completely wrong because age gap, power imbalance, and if he's interested in her at that age, then he's a predator. She then meets him again when she's 16 and volunteering at a Bible camp. So at this point, he's like, 24, maybe older. We're not entirely sure. And she says, "Guess who was there? You got it. My future husband, Mr. King in Charge, famous preacher man himself." It is almost like a teenager wrote this, isn't it? "He was the special speaker all week, so I had plenty of time to check him out. All the time I was checking him out, he was checking out one of the other girls at the camp. I didn't really care, as I had no emotional attachment to him." So at this point, she's acknowledging that he's a 24-year-old man checking out some other teenage girl, a child. Massive, massive red flag. So apparently this isn't just a one-time thing where he fell for a person he happened to meet when she was underage and he wasn't. You could maybe get away with that and say it was a one-off thing, personalities, blah, blah, blah. Clearly he has a pattern of checking out young teenagers throughout his adult life, and that just screams creepy predator to me. And again, he's doing this while he's in a position of power and authority over them, speaking in a teenager's Bible camp. He's supposed to be there to protect them, and he's checking them out. That's not okay. That's absolutely not okay. Creepily though, another adult counsellor comes along and tells her that she'll marry him one day. It's really bizarre. Stop trying to marry off children to adult men, please. It's gross. And anyway, he ends up coming to work at her church, and she writes, "So now I called my future husband Brother Pearl. We became great friends, but he still treated me like I was a kid." Weird, isn't it? I don't know, maybe that's something to do with the fact that probably she was a child. And she goes on to describe how they became close because, and I quote, "He needed a flunky, someone to carry out plans. And so she became that flunky. She started helping me out with everything." Oddly, she writes, "Michael usually had a girlfriend with him for all these events. Sometimes I had a boyfriend. It was truly strange. His girlfriend would sit between us, so he would have to lean forward to talk to me about the meetings or strategy or whatever we had going. There, right between us, sat his date with nothing to contribute. Sometimes we would pray together with some girl sitting there as if she were a non-being. I was his helper. He needed me." So, oh my god, this whole thing just sounds to me like he's using her and grooming her, meanwhile he's got some other girl on the go. Like, this doesn't sound like healthy relationship goals to me, and I cannot believe she's sharing this story as something inspirational and not as a cautionary tale. Like, yeah, I just did everything for him while some other girl was called his girlfriend. Like, he's using you. He's very clearly using you, and because you're underage, it's probably a bit of grooming, you know? Also, please note here the internalized misogyny. The other woman or women, the girlfriends, she says she doesn't see them as a rival, but clearly there's some jealousy there, and she literally refers to them as non-beings. It's taken me a long time to be aware of this kind of thing, and I've absolutely been guilty of it in the past, but now I can't stop seeing all these instances of how so often men play us against each other, and they sort of they make us jealous of other women. They make us see them as our rivals to be torn down, because that's how men maintain their power over us. So these things like calling her a non-being, or when we get in fights with other women over men, like, that is pure and simple internalized misogyny, and I have been so guilty of this so many times, and it's something that now I can recognize and see in myself. I'm trying really, really hard not to do anymore, and it is hard. It's really, really hard. Like, recently, I had my heart absolutely, like, smashed to pieces by this guy who has basically been, like, leading me on for a long time. And he made me think that we had, like, this something special, and that, like, the time just wasn't right, and, you know, when he finished up this job, then, like, we'd be together, and it was, like, this whole thing. And he made plans for me to go and visit him while he was working and all this stuff. And it turns out that, like, he basically cancelled on me at one point so he could have this other girl go out and visit him so he could just sleep with her. And it absolutely, like, destroyed me and broke my heart. And it turns out that I wasn't special to him. I wasn't, you know, he didn't really care about me. He just was leading a bunch of us on, apparently. And when I found out, my initial reaction was like, oh, this bitch. And my head went straight to, like, oh, how could she? She's not even pretty, she's not this. And then I was like, wait, she's not the one who hurt me. She probably had no idea I was even in the picture, just like I had no idea she was. So there's no point me being mad at her, because this is all on him. He's the one who messed me around and hurt me and led me on, And when he knew I had like all these feelings for him, like he's the one in the wrong. So I think being aware of these things within ourselves and like catching them and stopping ourselves from lashing out at the wrong people and acting in these ways is really, really important. And it's one of the best things that we as women can kind of learn to identify in ourselves and try and change our behaviour around, you know? That's how we support each other and build each other up, and stop letting men pit us against each other. Anyway, not the point, off topic, sorry. One thing I will say for Debbie though is that she had some self-confidence at this time, whether she realised it or not, because she tells this story of how all these other girls would tell Michael, and I quote, that God wanted them to be his wife, and yet she, without batting an eyelid, is like, yeah, but they're all wrong. I'm the only one that God actually meant, right? She's like, they're all mistaken, but I'm not. So she has this like strange self-confidence where she's like, well, we're all being told the same things, but I'm the only one that it's true for. So I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, I can kind of respect that in her a little bit. She literally later writes, like towards the end of the chapter, think about this. Several girls all thought it was God's will for Michael to be their husband. How was it that these fine Christian girls all truly believed he was the one for them, yet were wrong? I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of like survivor's bias or something talking, but you have to applaud her confidence. Anyway, she goes on with her story. She goes on to say, Michael and I came to know each other in a wholesome way. There was never any deep sharing of innermost feelings. We never confided, but he did see me as mad as a hornet a couple of times. I saw him being pushy and demanding, but I knew he was genuine. I saw his heart for winning lost souls, and he saw my willingness to jump in and do the worst jobs for the gospel's sake, enjoying every minute of it. So here we have a story of a pushy and demanding man who has essentially been grooming this young woman, this teenager, to be willing to do the worst jobs whenever he asks, while never sharing any deep or meaningful feelings or part of himself with her, and this is just supposed to be a good thing. It seems it's all give from her and take from Michael. That's what I'm getting from this. Anyway, she says that he never seemed to notice that I was female, so she decides, instead of just talking to him and telling him her feelings, which she has clearly developed at this point, and having an adult conversation, she is going to trick him, and she lies to him about getting married to someone else just to make him jealous, to see if he reacts, which is a very, very mature way of living your life. She goes on to say, Michael told me, like much later on in their lives, at that moment, he suddenly saw me in a whole different life. He said he had always taken for granted that I would be there as his buddy, his friend, his helper. Now he knew I had grown up and would soon be gone. I would be another man's wife, another man's buddy, another man's helper. He decided he didn't like that idea, so he gets possessive. But she also says, he still didn't give me the time of day, but I knew he was different. I often caught him looking at me like he was contemplating. I feel like she's romanticizing so much abusive behaviour, like even years later. God, the mental gymnastics are just astounding. So she's 20 years old at this point, and one night they go to work at this like ministering event thing together. They're like praying with a bunch of people, and he holds her hand while they pray, and she takes this to be this like huge sign. This is a huge deal. He held her hand. She says, when we pulled into the church parking lot, I moved to get out, and he reached out and grabbed my hand again. Yet he still remained totally silent. It was late. I was exhausted. I'd been up for almost 24 hours. My emotions were spent. Now, I'm not going to say he's about to take advantage of her in a vulnerable situation, but I wasn't even keyed up. I was so tired. I sat now, silent and unmoving. Then my tired tongue softly spoke my thoughts. I reminded him about the young boy he had baptized the previous Sunday evening. I talked about how the boy kept jumping up in the water so he could see his parents. Then I said the unthinkable. You know, someday I would love to give you a son. To my memory, I'd never thought such a thing. But what's said is said. Michael reacted like a rocket. Out of the car he shot into the dark. Around the building he ran. I just laughed. I was too tired to be really concerned. He came running straight to me, then grabbed me around my waist and threw me in the air while shouting, "Let's get married!" And we did, just 8 days later on a Sunday evening. It's a doozy of a fairy tale. I have been his wildcat, barefooted princess for 40 years. How good can it get? Real good. Now call me a cynic, but none of this screams fairy tale to me. None of it. Like, this is a nightmare drowning in red flags. This screams get the hell out of there to me. None of this is indicative of there having been any mutual respect or honesty or true care for each other or any of the other like basic hallmarks of a healthy relationship. I have seen none of that in this story. She literally ends the chapter with the lines, "You might think this can't happen to me. It's too different. But now let's figure out how to get you a man worth getting." Ridiculous. This is such like a cautionary tale. And then she ends the chapter with a couple of pages about the importance of praying because, and I quote, "I believe that sometime in his youth, Michael asked God for someone to faithfully pray for him. His prayers released a group of angels. It is possible the angels went to several girls to provoke them to pray. Maybe the other girls prayed amiss, not for the warrior, but for themselves to get a wonderful husband. One angel thought if he found a girl young in..." Oh, this is disgusting. One angel thought if he found a girl young enough, she would not be sidetracked to always be thinking of marrying. He fought a heavenly war to get my attention to pray. And that's the end of the chapter. So, let's end this video with a quick recap on what some of these red flags were in this story and how you can kind of avoid them in your own life and relationships so you know what to look out for and what to avoid. Red flag number 1, you meet in a situation where there is an obvious power imbalance or large age gap when one of you is a child. Red flag number 2 is that he's an adult who doesn't respect boundaries with children. For example, he checks out teenagers despite being in his mid-20s. Why isn't he pursuing women his own age? Number 3 is that he uses Debbie to do all the jobs that he doesn't want to do himself, signifying he's using her, or he has less respect for her than he has for himself. He sees her as lesser than him in some way. Why can't he do those jobs? Why is he too good to do them and she's not? Red flag number 4 is she describes him as being pushy and demanding. If that's what he's allowed her to write about him, then what does she actually think of him? He never openly communicates his thoughts and feelings, only ever demands things Debbie can do for him. Again, he's using her, it just kind of taken advantage, not a good sign. Red flag number 6, we've seen no evidence of him ever selflessly doing anything for her in the first 7 years that we knew each other, probably not after either. Red flag number 7 is everything was always on his terms and not hers. So there are a few bits of this that I didn't quite read out, but there were stories of like when they were going somewhere and he wouldn't pick her up in his car and he'd always like insist that she meet him at a certain place and do this and, you know, do things on his schedule in his way, and nothing was ever about being convenient or easy for her. It was always about him and his needs and what he wanted to do. It was always on his terms. Red flag number 8 was that he would belittle other women in front of her. Again, this was a bit that I didn't read out, but there was a point where he was like complaining about all the other girls who were like hitting on him and like saying, I think God wants me to marry you, and he would like then go to Debbie and like mock these other girls and stuff. So again, huge red flag. This is up there with, again, like if you date a guy and he's like, oh, all my exes are crazy. Huge red flag there. Number 9 is that she felt she had to manipulate him into getting what she wanted instead of just speaking to him honestly. If you can't have an open conversation and you can't communicate, maybe it's not a good relationship. Number 10 is that when he finally made a move, he absolutely rushed from 0 to 100 in a second. Why did they have to get married in 8 days? Why did it have to go from like acknowledgement of feelings by holding hands to a marriage proposal in the same night? When a man rushes things like that, again, usually a big red flag. And the list goes on, there's probably more. If you saw any more red flags in this story that I haven't mentioned, please let me know down in the comments. It's good to share these things and talk about them so we can acknowledge what's healthy and what isn't in relationships. When we have a clearly abusive, toxic relationship and a really messy story like this of potentially predatory behaviour being passed off as a fairy tale and inspirational and something to aspire to, that is a problem. And it's important that we talk about it and talk about why it's an issue and how we can kind of not resolve it, but how we can avoid these things in our own lives, you know? But anyway, that is where I'm going to end things today. I'll be looking at this book in more detail in other videos. In the meantime, please feel free to go check out my other videos that I've made on Michael and Debi Pearl and their literature. Debbie is also the one who is responsible for the horrific Christian fiction, which I still need to make my part 2 about. I will do, it's just... I don't know, I've got to be in the right headspace for that kind of thing, so I'm getting there, don't worry. Shameless little bit of self-promotion before we end is if you like clothes with crazy bold patterns like this, I have new merch available, which is like this really cool all-over print abstract t-shirt design and matching leggings that is using basically one of my paintings as a print, which I love. It's really fun, it's so bright and bold, and it might not be to everyone's taste, but if you like your crazy clothes like I do, I think you'll like it, so you can go check that out in my merch store now if you want. But yeah, thank you for watching today, I appreciate you guys a hell of a lot, and hopefully I'll see you again really soon.